What's going on, everybody? Burf here. Today I'm going to be ranking all 32 teams and how they lie from S tier all the way down to F tier. So stay tuned to find out where your team lies with Burf's non-biased ranking system. Also, before we get started, please like and subscribe this video. Burf is trying to get to 50 subscribers. That way I can go live on the channel, and that's when the real Burf's going to come out. So please like and subscribe.
Yo, it's the Burf Show, here to run the game. I'm a Bengals fan, repping my team with no shame.
First up, starting it off with the Arizona Cardinals, led by a Kyler Murray offense. I do think Kyler Murray is an above average quarterback. That's probably an unpopular opinion, but his first 3 years, he almost hit 4,000 yards each season until he tore his ACL the year before last, and then last season he only played half the season because he's still recovering from that ACL. So I don't think they're a bottom tier by any means, but they did lose their number one wide receiver, Hollywood Brown, throughout free agency. So because I am ranking this before the draft and before they gain Marvin Harrison Jr., which I think will bump them up a few classes, I'm going to put the Arizona Cardinals at the C tier. Another team that Burf is pretty high on is the Atlanta Falcons. They went out and got Kirk Cousins, but they already have Bijan Robinson, Drake London, and Kyle Pitts. All three of those players were probably underserved last year, so it's going to be exciting to see what Kirk Cousins can do with this offense. And their defense, they stole Jesse Bates from the Cincinnati Bengals last year. Jesse Bates, I believe, is one of the best, or if not the best, safety in the league. So they are definitely moving into that way higher tier. I'm going to put them in the A tier. Now let's move on to the Baltimore Ravens, which is one of Burf's division rivals. And like I said before the video started, I am going to be non-biased with these rankings. But the Baltimore Ravens have picked up almost nobody. They've been basically the Dallas Cowboys. They picked up Derrick Henry, which looks good on paper, but mind you, he is 30 years old. He's not prime Derrick Henry. And this is exactly what Ravens do. They pick up older free agents who, they signed Steve Smith Sr., OBJ, and now Derrick Henry. This is just classic Baltimore Ravens, just picking up players at the tail end of their career. So moving on to the defense side of the ball. On the defense side of the ball, they re-signed Madubuike and they let everyone else walk. They let Patrick Queen walk to a division rival. They also let Geno Stone walk to the Cincinnati Bengals. So while the rest of the division is getting stronger, Baltimore Ravens is getting weaker. So because of that, I'm putting Baltimore in the D tier. Now moving on to the Buffalo Bills, who do remind me a lot of the Baltimore Ravens in terms of free agency this year, because they go out and they get a Curtis Samuel, but they lose a lot of players because they're in that cap space jail, and they let Gabe Davis, they let Jordan Poyer walk. Jordan Poyer walked to a division rival. He was out in ayahuasca with Aaron Rodgers, free in his mind, and he gets notified that he's being signed by the Miami Dolphins. So I do think he's one of those top tier safeties that is going to be pretty detrimental to the Bills defense. If you look at my team, the Cincinnati Bengals last year, when they lost Jesse Bates and Von Bell, right, two great safeties, then the defense was one of the top defenses in the NFL in 2022, going down to one of the worst defenses in 2023. So I do think that's going to affect the Buffalo Bills. So last year I would have put them in that A tier. This year I'm put them in that B tier. But again, I think once the draft happens, they can address some of those holes that they're missing. So let's move them to that B tier. Now time for the worst team from last year, the Carolina Panthers. The Carolina Panthers, I do think, are going to improve. I don't think they're going to finish last in the NFL like they did last year. But I don't think they're doing Bryce Young any favors by signing Deontay Johnson. Deontay Johnson is not the answer. He can't be your number one wide receiver. He'd be a good wide receiver too, but as a wide receiver one, he's not the answer. They also lost Hayden Hurst. Now, I get it. Hayden Hurst didn't play a whole lot last year. He had that serious concussion and I think sat out for the rest of the season. But I thought could have been a helpful target for Bryce Young. And then they did go out and get a guard and a linebacker that I do think is going to help out with their defense, but they lost Von Bell, and now they're paying Von Bell's salary to be on the Cincinnati Bengals. I do think they will improve slightly, but it's not enough to move them up to that C tier. So let's keep them right here with the Baltimore Ravens at the D tier. Now time for the Chicago Bears. I know I said this is a post-free agency rankings. However, if there's one safe bet going into the draft, it's that Caleb Williams will go number 1 to the Chicago Bears, and he will be their starting quarterback next year. Now, the Chicago Bears lost Justin Fields, and they gave him away for almost nothing. So I do think that's going to cause an issue. If I was the Chicago Bears, I would have held on to him longer to see if I can get more out of him. I think where the Chicago Bears mindset was they saw teams like Buccaneers and Falcons, Seahawks, they all got their quarterbacks. They were relying on teams like those without quarterbacks to make a trade offer to the Chicago Bears. In hindsight, if the Chicago Bears would have just waited a little longer, maybe even hold Justin Fields a little bit in the season and wait for one of the starting quarterbacks to go down, then they could have got a lot more value for Justin Fields. Now, Caleb Williams is walking into a better situation than most first round draft picks. If you go back in history, typically the first draft pick is going to the worst team. The Chicago Bears weren't the worst team last year. Therefore, I do think Caleb Williams does bump up the Chicago Bears a few tiers. So I think it's safe that we can put him in the B tier. Now it's time for the Cincinnati Bengals, who by far have done the best throughout all 32 teams in free agency. They filled every single weakness that they had, and they went out and got players to fill those voids. They picked up players like Mike Gesicki, who was a force to be reckoned with when he played for Miami. Didn't do so hot with New England's offense, but I think with this pass-heavy offense that the Bengals have, Mike Gesicki is going to do great. They also picked up Sheldon Rankins. Sheldon Rankins will fill in nicely for losing DJ Reader. Then they went out and got Von Bell. Von Bell was a prior Bengal who played for the Panthers last year, and now Panthers are paying majority of Von Bell's salary. And to complement Von Bell, we went out and got Geno Stone. Now the Bengals have the best safety tandem in the league. No one's better than the Bengals safety tandem. And then to put the icing on the cake, we got Trent Brown, the best offensive tackle available in free agency. Yes, he's a little bit older, but as long as he can stay healthy, Joe Burrow is going to have all the time he needs in the pocket. This will be the first time in Joe Burrow's career where he can just safely sit in the pocket and relax. The offensive line with Trent Brown, Alex Kappa, Ted Karras, Cordell Volson, and Orlando Brown Jr. is by far the best offensive line in the NFL. Mark my words, they will be ranked number 1 offensive line, along with number 1 safety, along with number 1 defensive line with Trey Hendrickson, Sam Hubbard, Sheldon Rankins. This team is guaranteed to win a Super Bowl. So therefore, I have to put the Cincinnati Bengals in the S tier. Now, staying in the same state, we have the Cleveland Browns, who I've mentioned on this channel before, made a huge mistake when they let Joe Flacco walk. The reason why they let Joe Flacco walk was because they did not want a fan quarterback controversy, meaning they did not want all their fan base to be screaming to put Joe Flacco in after Deshaun Watson throws a couple interceptions, because that's what was going to happen, because Joe Flacco saved their season last year after Deshaun Watson went down with an injury. So in the Cleveland Browns fans' heads, and they're probably right, because Joe Flacco, I think, is a better quarterback currently than Deshaun Watson. But that would obviously just start a controversy that management does not want. So instead of signing Joe Flacco, what did the Browns do? They went and got Jameis Winston, a guy who admitted that he was blind for half his career and had to get laser eye surgery. He played half his career blind. And on top of that, he has major PR issues. I'm sure the Browns PR management is in shambles right now, trying to figure out why the GM just signed a quarterback with the same off-the-field issues as their starting quarterback. And all they really did throughout free agency was they traded for Jerry Jeudy. That was their only notable pickup. Quite honestly, he is not that high caliber wide receiver 1 material that we talk about. But apparently that's what the Browns are looking for, is to be mediocre. So I think the Browns fall all the way down to that D position or D tier this year. Sorry, Cleveland. Moving on to the Dallas Cowboys. The Dallas Cowboys have made almost 0 moves throughout free agency. Their only external pickup was Eric Kendricks, who is a good linebacker, but only picking up 1 player from an external team is not going to make you much better. The Cowboys are just stuck in this middle of the path road. that they were stuck with the Tony Romo era. They're in the same era with Dak Prescott. They get to the playoffs, they either lose the wild card round or they lose the divisional round, and then they're out and they're hoping for a better season next year. They always have a pretty good regular season. And honestly, it reminds me of the Andy Dalton era of the Cincinnati Bengals. You know, where Andy Dalton would have good regular season, lead us to the playoffs, and then lose the first round. We'd always be disappointed and then looking forward to the following season. But Dallas never truly goes into a rebuild mode because they do so well in the regular season. They never have a high draft pick. What they need to do is trade Dak Prescott for a bunch of draft picks, get what you can from him while he's still young, start a mediocre quarterback, let's say like Josh Dobbs, for instance, have one season of tanking, get a high draft pick. We don't know who's going to be there next year, right? We can guess, but you never know. There could be a Joe Burrow type quarterback coming through next year's draft. Draft that and build off that. Now, Dallas does have a great defense, led by Micah Parsons, and that's going to carry them. And their offense isn't terrible. Like I said, they're just middle of the road. So quite honestly, that's where I'm going to rank them, right in the middle of the road for this upcoming season, right at B. Now let's move on to the Denver Broncos. And quite honestly, Burf has no idea what's going on in Denver. I don't think Denver knows what's going on in Denver. They have traded away their starting quarterback, Russell Wilson, but they're paying for his salary. That should go to show how much Russell Wilson has declined within the last few years, that a team is willing to pay his salary for another team. But they're in this quarterback situation where if the season starts tomorrow, Jarrett Stidham would be their starting quarterback. Now, once the draft rolls around, I don't think that's going to be the situation. There's a lot of talks about Bo Nix joining Denver, but some other mock drafts have them drafting like a cornerback, the first pick. So this draft will dictate on what Denver is thinking. It could very well be that Denver's just trying to tank this season and hope for the best next season. If that is the case, I do feel bad for the Denver fans. No fan should have to sit there and watch their team tank, but sometimes it is like the necessary evil of trying to do a rebuild. So because of all that, I'm going to have to rank the Broncos at D. All right, now moving on to the Detroit Lions. Burf loves some things about the Detroit Lions, but some of those things that I love, I think, are also holding the Lions back. And one of those things is Dan Campbell. Dan Campbell, I think he's pretty much universally loved across the whole NFL fandom. But as we saw in the NFC Championship game last season, that going for it on fourth down instead of kicking a field goal, that causes some issues, especially when you don't convert. Now, if he would have converted, obviously I would be sitting here having a different conversation on how they would likely be the Super Bowl champs, because I don't think there's any way Kansas City can beat that team. On top of that, they also signed DJ Reader. DJ Reader is coming off a pretty serious quad injury, and at that stage of his career, I believe it's his second quad injury. At that stage of his career, I don't know how well he'll recover. Now, he is one of the best defensive linemen in the game. Don't get me wrong. So if he does return healthy, it's you basically have an Aaron Donald. They also picked up Kevin Zeiler, which is also another previous Bengal. And he's just going to be another staple in that already amazing offensive line. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Detroit Lions have been so successful, especially this past season, was because of that offensive line. With Jahmyr Gibbs now at running back, and then also you have Jared Goff, which I don't think Jared Goff is that elite quarterback, but because he's playing behind that elite offensive line, I mean, look at Dak Prescott his first couple of seasons in the league. He's playing behind an elite offensive line, and I think that offensive line made Dak look a lot better than what he was. And I think the same thing's going on with Jared Goff, But Jared Goff, don't get me wrong, he does have an NFC Championship ring, and he has led a team to a Super Bowl. It is very possible he is a serviceable quarterback, and he can get you a Super Bowl ring. So because of that, I'm going to rank the Lions at S along with the Cincinnati Bengals. I wouldn't be surprised if this is your 2024-2025 Super Bowl matchup right here. Now for the Green Bay Packers. The Green Bay Packers is a team that did surprise Burf last year. I did not think they were going to be great. They surprised me. Jordan Love turned into another great Green Bay quarterback. They went from Brett Favre to Aaron Rodgers to Jordan Love. That is some extremely, I don't know if you can call it luck or if it's just the Green Bay way of operating, of having your draft pick quarterback sit behind the current starting quarterback, and then once his day comes, he moves up and becomes that that elite quarterback. And I think Jordan Love is exactly that. He showed a lot of promise last year. This year in free agency, they picked up Xavier McKinney to a big 4-year contract. He's definitely improving the defense. They also picked up Josh Jacobs, which I think is an upgrade from Aaron Jones. Other than those two pickups, they didn't make a huge splash in free agency, but they're already a pretty good team. Therefore, I do think they have a pretty good shot at making a deep playoff run. I'm going to rank them at tier A. Moving on to the Houston Texans, which is another team that worries Burf a little bit because, one, they beat the Bengals last year, but two, C.J. Stroud is that young, up-and-coming quarterback who showed much promise last year. But sometimes quarterbacks do go through a sophomore slump, and I'm not saying he will. I'm just saying that is sometimes that happens. Other than that, they acquired Joe Mixon through trade from the Bengals. They got rid of Devin Singletary. Might I add, Devin Singletary was a great running back for him last season. He was another surprise that I didn't see happening. But I do think Joe Mixon will be just as good, or if not better, than Devin Singletary. They also have a really elite wide receiver core with Nico Collins and Noah Brown leading the charge there. Then they added like 3 external free agents to their defense, so their defense is only going to get better. I do think they have a chance at making a deep playoff run as long as they don't run into the Cincinnati Bengals. So I'm going to rank them at A as well. Another interesting team from last year were the Indianapolis Colts. They looked to be on fire up until Anthony Richardson got hurt. And we were all thinking, well, with no Anthony Richardson and with no Jonathan Taylor, there's no way that they're going to make the playoffs. They might as well just tank and get a good draft pick. But they didn't. Gardner Minshew came in, and he almost led them to a good playoff berth. On free agency, they didn't make much of a splash. They picked up Davis, D-tackle from the Miami Dolphins, which I do think he's going to make the defense better. And they also lost Zach Moss, which, the Bengals picked up. And I think Zach Moss did a great job for them last year. So that's one thing that, in case Jonathan Taylor goes down, I don't think they're going to have that continuity that they had last year. But the good news is, with Joe Flacco now being a backup quarterback, if Anthony Richardson goes down, Jonathan Taylor stays in, I still think they have a good shot at making the playoffs. And honestly, this is a hard decision for me because they could land anywhere from A to C. So I'm going to put them, I believe C would be our best safe bet. Now moving on to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Jaguars is a team that Burf wants to like, but I think they're most comparable to the Chargers, right? They have that quarterback that could be a great quarterback, but they're not putting the right pieces around him in order for him to flourish. They couldn't get the deal done with Josh Allen, so they had to franchise tag him. Since they franchise tagged him, they couldn't franchise tag Calvin Ridley. They let him walk. Granted, Calvin Ridley signed for a ton of money, and I think it might have been the best decision not to re-sign him. Now their only notable wide receiver is Christian Kirk, and the only notable names in their secondary is Campbell and Darby. Other than that, they have no depth. I don't know what Jacksonville's doing. I hope they get a new GM or something to build a team around Trevor Lawrence. Because right now, it's hard to watch, especially as a Bengals fan who was scared about Joe Burrow going through the same situation. But it turns out management change, leadership change, Katie Blackburn's in charge now. And, it's for the best. Now, quote of the day, sometimes there needs to be major changes to make major changes. And that's what Jacksonville needs to do. They need to figure it out. So I'm putting them in the C tier. Now it's time for one of Burf's favorite teams, the Kansas City Chiefs. The Kansas City Chiefs have been absolutely awful throughout free agency. They did re-sign Chris Jones, one of their best defenders. And they also picked up Hollywood Brown, who's really going to help him out on the offensive side. But you have an aging Travis Kelce that you're not addressing. He's going to be not very good next season. This is not going to be the Travis Kelce that we're all used to, right? The greatest tight end of all time. We are not getting that Travis Kelce next season. We're getting the Taylor Swift version of that Travis Kelce. He's going to be touring around with T Swift all offseason, going overseas. He's not going to be training. He's aging. He should have retired. He's not getting any younger. And so they brought in Hollywood Brown. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, they have gotten a lot worse. They lost Snead. Now, let me tell you a reason why Chris Jones does get a lot of pressure. There's a thing called coverage sacks. When the defensive backs have good coverage, it makes the opposing quarterback hold on to the ball longer. Therefore, players like Chris Jones can now have what we call a coverage sack, without Snead, you're not going to have any of those coverage sacks. Chris Jones is going to have a major, major step back this season. Kansas City's defense will not be the number one defense next year. They won't even be close. And quite honestly, Burf is going to be pretty surprised if they even make the playoffs next year. They're in a rough division, so I'm going to put them at B, right there in the middle of the path, with the Cowboys, Bears, and Bills. Now moving on to the Chargers, Burf really likes Justin Herbert. I think he's a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. And, even a few years ago, they were talking about if the Bengals actually drafted the right guy or not. The debate was Justin Herbert versus Joe Burrow. I think that debate's pretty clear now. Joe Burrow is a clear front runner. I think Joe Burrow, and this is my non-biased opinion, Joe Burrow is the best quarterback in the NFL. But going back to the Chargers, Justin Herbert is another great quarterback, but the problem is they didn't build around Justin Herbert like I thought they would. They seem to have all the right pieces with Keenan Allen and Austin Eckler and Mike Williams, but it just never panned out for him. I don't know why. I don't know if it was coaching. I really don't have a strong insight on what made the Chargers fail. But moving on to the free agency, they were still able to hold on to Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa on the defensive side. So their defense will still be great. However, they got rid of Justin Herbert's weapons. They got rid of Keenan Allen. They got rid of Austin Eckler. So even if coaching was the issue, now Justin Herbert doesn't have any weapons. So I can't put them in a higher tier than I would of last year. They're definitely in a lower tier. So because of that, I am putting the Chargers in the C tier. Now, moving on to the Los Angeles Rams, who I think did a really good job at addressing their offensive line issues. They picked up Jonah Jackson, and they also picked up another guard who is going to help out with their transition and becoming a run-heavy offense, running straight to the defenders instead of worrying about cutbacks and more of a zone read offense. But on the defensive side of the ball, it's the exact opposite story, and they lost a huge piece of that defense with Aaron Donald retiring. And anytime you have a first ballot Hall of Famer like Aaron Donald retire, the team is definitely going to take a step back. I mean, he's not only a great player on the defense, but he's also a leader of that defense. Therefore, I'm going to be putting the Rams in the C tier. Now, moving on to the Raiders. The Raiders are taking a major step back on offense by losing Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs, I think, is still one of the better backs in the league and can put up crazy numbers on any given game. To replace Josh Jacobs, they picked up Madison, which I think is maybe the half of the running back as Josh Jacobs is. They also lost Jimmy Garoppolo, and to replace Jimmy Garoppolo, they pick up Gardner Minshew. I think that's probably an even trade. Maybe Gardner Minshew has a higher ceiling, but also has a lower floor than Jimmy Garoppolo. But on the defensive side of the ball, that's where things get kind of scary because they already have a great pass rush, and adding to that pass rush, they're adding Christian Wilkins, who is one of the craziest defenders now that Aaron Donald has retired. He's top 3 defensive tackles in the league right now. That defense is going to be scary to play. I can honestly see the Raiders being almost how the Steelers were last year, where their defense is winning a lot of games. Therefore, I'm going to be moving the Raiders in the B tier. Miami Dolphins is another team that Burf is really high on because that high-powered offense ran by mastermind Mike McDaniels, and you have 2 Tyreek Hill, and then those running backs, it seems like once one goes down, the next one steps up, and he's just as good or if not better. That offense is definitely scary. I mean, they put up 70 points against an NFL team, a professional football team, last year against the Denver Broncos. So that really goes to show how high-powered this offense truly can be. There is one downside, because once this high-powered offense makes the playoffs, they tend to choke. And until I'm proven otherwise, I have no choice but to put them in that Dallas Cowboys type category. Now, on their defense side of the ball, they picked up a lot of free agents on both sides of the ball, a lot of depth pieces, but 2 names that really stick out is Jordan Poyer and Shaq Barrett. On the defense side of the ball, Shaq Barrett is going to be a great pass rusher at linebacker, and Jordan Poyer is one of those safeties that can really just do it all. However, they did lose Christian Wilkins, which was a huge piece of that pass rush. So because of that, I am ranking them in the A tier. I don't think they're ready for a huge, long playoff run, but I could see them in the Bengals in an AFC Championship game. That's as long as they don't choke. That's the biggest thing. Until they prove me otherwise, they can't be in that S tier. All right, so for these next 2 teams, you have the Minnesota Vikings and the New England Patriots. This is super easy for Burf because Minnesota Vikings, your guys' quarterback is Sam Darnold right now. Yes, you still have JJ, but you're going in that D tier until you get a quarterback because I don't care how good JJ is, you got to have a quarterback to throw it to him. And Sam Darnold is not the answer. And Patriots, you guys have a quarterback named Bailey right now. Get a real quarterback. Sorry. Moving on to the New Orleans Saints, which is another team that Burf was a little high on last year, and I was really disappointed with Derek Carr's performance. I thought he was going to go to a new team and do great, and that just wasn't the case. And this year in free agency, they haven't done anything to really prove to me that they're trying to get better. They picked up Chase Young, but Chase Young is going to have neck surgery, so he's going to be out for the majority of the season. He might be able to play in the tail end of the season, and they're giving a bunch of guaranteed money, but I think that guaranteed money is dependent on whether or not he plays or not. I think it's like a per-game thing, so I don't even know if it's considered guaranteed. That whole contract situation really confuses me. But they also picked up Cedric Wilson, which is good wide receiver depth. They still have Olave, which I think really has a lot more room to grow. New Orleans, you haven't showed Burf enough. I think you guys possibly could make the playoffs next year, so I'm putting you in that C tier. Now moving on to the New York Giants. The New York Giants, just running down the list here, they lost Xavier McKinney, Saquon Barkley, A'Shawn Robinson. I mean, they're losing all their best players. So this is telling me that they're trying to tank. They only picked up a guard. They picked up Devin Singletary, who did a good job for Houston, but I think Singletary fit well in Houston's offense. I don't know how well he's going to fit in New York Giants offense. And they lost their backup quarterback, Tyrod Taylor, and picked up Drew Lock. As of right now, with Daniel Jones leading their team, now this is obviously before draft. I will do another one after the draft, but there's nothing right now telling me that they're actually trying for next season. Therefore, yet it's another team that I am putting in the D tier. New York Jets. They're a team a year ago that was a fan favorite to win the Super Bowl. However, they're relying on a 40-year-old plus Aaron Rodgers to get that done. I'm a fan of Aaron Rodgers. But anytime you have a quarterback that old and you're relying on his health, it can be a problem, as you noticed last year. And there's also some distractions with the Jets right now. Aaron Rodgers is announcing that he's running for vice president. Personally, I've never ran for vice president, but I would assume that would take up a lot of your quarterback's time. As long as Aaron Rodgers stays healthy, I think they can be pretty dangerous. But that's asking a lot, is for Aaron Rodgers to stay healthy for a full season, given his age. And it's not, I don't know his whole workout routine, but I don't think he's on that Tom Brady workout routine. Therefore, I'm going to be putting the Jets at tier A. On to the Eagles. The Eagles picked up Saquon Barkley, who obviously is still a great running back in this league. Great pass catcher, great runner, just all around great running back. They also picked up outside linebacker Bryce Huff, who is just going to be absolutely incredible in that defense. However, a notable loss is Jason Kelce. That means the tush push it will be no longer, which I think is huge for Philadelphia. Every single win I saw Philadelphia have last year, it seemed like it was due to that tush push. I can't tell you how many times I've seen them 4th and short. Even if 4th and 2, they do the tush push and they can make it happen. It doesn't matter if they're on their own side of the field or if they're in the red zone. They are getting that almost 100% of the time. But with Jason Kelce retiring, I am willing to bet that tush push, it will no longer be a thing. You know, a lot of people say that it's because of Jalen Hurts and how much he can squat, but there's plenty of quarterbacks who can squat a ton solely because of the center. I mean, Jason Kelce, he got so low. His technique on the tush push was absolutely insane. No defender could get under Jason Kelce, and that's why it worked so well. So that in itself is going to be a huge issue for Philadelphia that they're going to have to overcome, not being able to go for those 4th and shorts. And for that reason, I'm putting the Eagles in the B tier. Now, moving on to a division rival here, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Like I said at the very beginning of this video, I'm going to be unbiased. Burf doesn't have a biased bone in his body. With that said, the Pittsburgh Steelers have not impressed me whatsoever throughout this free agency. Everyone's talking about, oh, how amazing is it that they picked up Russell Wilson and Denver has to pay his salary. Let me tell you something. Denver is paying Russell Wilson millions and millions of dollars for him not to be on their team anymore.
With Russ knowing that the dead cap consequences were so severe to make that decision to let him go?
No.
That should tell you something, Pittsburgh, on the talent that Russell Wilson doesn't have anymore. Mr. Limited is going to hold back your team. And then on top of that, you got Justin Fields, who I think is a better quarterback. And I think you think he is a better quarterback. And what does that mean? When Russell Wilson is doing bad the first couple weeks, you guys are all going to be crying like how TJ Watt was when he didn't win the Defense Player of the Year for Justin Fields to take the field. Quite honestly, on top of that, I don't even know if Mike Tomlin would make that decision. He hasn't made a good decision in forever. The reason why he does have a Super Bowl trophy is because of the team that he inherited. Ever since then, he hasn't done anything besides having a positive record. And if that's good enough for you, Steelers, then so be it. For us Bengals fans, we're out to get another ring. Yeah, that's right. I said another ring because we already have an AFC championship ring, something that you guys haven't had in years. So because of that, Pittsburgh, you're going right there at the bottom in the D tier. Now, the Seattle Seahawks is another team that hasn't made much of a splash in free agency. They re-signed Leonard Williams. They lost Damian Lewis, lost Colby Parkinson, and re-signed Noah Fant. Other than that, they haven't really done anything. So I have no reason to rank them any higher than C tier. Finally, I get to talk about a good team, the San Francisco 49ers. San Francisco has been great the last couple of years. They just can't get over that hump. Obviously, last year was the Super Bowl hump. The years previous was the NFC Championship hump. So they did make an improvement last year by making to the Super Bowl. Do you think there's a possibility Mr. Irrelevant will be able to get them over that hump again? They still have Deebo Samuel and Christian McCaffrey on top of that. I don't really understand this, but they're trying to get rid of Brandon Ayuk. As of right now, he's still on the team. But other notable free agents that they lost Eric Armstead, gained Leonard Floyd, gained Yetur Gross-Matos, and they lost Chase Young. So honestly, I don't see them regressing much, so I'm putting them right there in the A tier next to the Bengals and next to the Lions. Moving on to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers re-signed Baker Mayfield. It goes to show that the Buccaneers are not as dumb as the Cleveland Browns, which is a good thing because Baker Mayfield can lead you to the playoffs and maybe a little of a playoff run. Not the Super Bowl, maybe not even the NFC Championship game, but he can lead you to the playoffs. And as a fan, that's pretty exciting. That's enough to get excited, maybe to go buy those season tickets. So I'll be putting the Buccaneers in the B tier. And hey, you're in the same tier as Kansas City Chiefs. So Tennessee Titans, there's not much to say other than you guys paid way too much for Calvin Ridley. You already had your wide receiver one a couple years ago, and you guys gave him away for nothing. And then now you're overpaying for an older wide receiver. And you also let Derrick Henry walk to a division rival of the Cincinnati Bengals. So for that reason alone, I have to put you right there at the bottom of the barrel at the D tier. Last but certainly not least, the Washington Commanders, who I think did make a pretty good splash in free agency. They picked up Austin Eckler, who I think is one of the best running backs in the league right now. He's going to be great on those third down situations, check down passes. He does it all. And Austin Eckler did have a down year last year, but I think he was severely underutilized. So if you use Austin Eckler right, it's going to take a lot of pressure off your quarterback. And just running down the huge list of free agencies that they picked up Armstrong, defense end, Luvu, linebacker, Nick Allegretti, guard, lost Antonio Gibson, but gained Austin Eckler. They also picked up Bobby Wagner, and if he can just show a little bit of what he did in his prime, I think that's a good pickup alone. So as of right now, keep this in mind, Washington, this is pre-draft. So if you guys do pick up a quarterback in the draft, you could move higher, but as of right now, I'm putting you in that C tier.
Yo, it's the Burf Show, here to run the game.